Hello everybody, welcome to the Wonky Angle where I talk about electronic music, both new and old, and today I'm talking about the not so new anymore, but still pretty new album from Skee, Compro. Or maybe it's Compro, but I'm gonna go with Compro. Skee is a German ambient techno artist who was brought to my attention fairly recently. He was recommended to me some time ago, like a friend of mine told me, and it reminded him of a bunch of my favorite albums, sound like the kind of thing I typically like, so I decided to give it a shot. That was well over a month ago. I've been trying to cover this one for a while now, I've been properly listening to it for a few weeks as well. But I just got distracted by other stuff. But I wanted to be able to cover this one. Now, this is the guy's second album. He's not been around very long. In fact, his first album, Shred, was released in 2016. So I was already well started reviewing by that point. This is a relative newcomer we got here, but he's starting to really make the rounds. I saw him show up on like some Discogs featured list or something. Now, I did check out Shred before I listened to this follow-up here, and honestly, I wasn't super impressed by that album. It was a decent ambient techno release with some cool breakbeat elements and decently well-executed atmosphere, but nothing really popped out about it to me at all. It fell into the background super easily. I found the experience entirely forgettable. It was an album that, while inoffensive and well-produced, did little more for me than become pleasurable background noise. But let's make it absolutely clear, I'm not the kind of person who would review an obscure artist I didn't enjoy. I just felt like I needed to get that out of the way since I felt like this follow-up album here, Compro, in spite of its far less interesting album cover, was a massive improvement across the board. While still not the most original thing I've ever heard, it totally feels like a throwback to the artificial intelligence era and reviving all sorts of sounds from the 90s I'm already well familiar with, and it's still very much an atmospheric ambient techno album, but the execution this time around was much better than his first one. It's hard to pin down what worked so much better about this album over his debut, but everything just popped out at me so much more. Melodies were better, much more present in the mix, atmosphere was more immersive, especially. The tracks were a lot more easily distinctive from one another, you get the idea. I won't dwell too much on his first album though, I'll just focus on this one. Because this is the one that I'm recommending to you guys today. It's the one I want you to check out. I'll just focus on the 12 tracks here, and there's not a single bad track in the bunch. There's certainly some better than others, but all of them have had at least something to enjoy. So going down track by track, our opener Cerroverb starts us out in a very subtle and atmospheric note. A lot of low-key, old-school IDM synth tones covered in reverb, followed by these big squonking, bassy effects that bring about waves of ambience. It's clearly an intro, but it's an intro that's well fleshed out and has a distinctive flavor. Session Ad continues in that more subtle vein, but more rhythmic. Starts out with these glitchy sounds that still follow his regular pattern and make some kind of high-pitched ringing in parts, like running some kind of scanner or metal detector. But the track keeps building on itself, bringing pads of ambient synths, adding subtle, micro-edited glitchy percussion, and halfway into the track layering a more energetic breakbeat on top. The whole vibe of these first two tracks, just excellently constructed, really gets you into this thing from the get-go. And as well as the third track, Rev 8617, which has easily the best and most memorable melody on the album. Still very glitchy and jerky, still builds up some really nice atmosphere. There's a lot of interesting stuff done with the percussion. I'll admit this isn't the kind of album that I come to for, like, catchy melodies. This is really the only track here that, like, it has a tune that kind of sticks in my head. But, I mean, the rest of the album obviously makes up for it in other departments. Going on from there, the next track, 50 Euro to Break Boost, gives me some pretty heavy Monolake vibes. The kind of buzzy kick drum and other percussion patterns remind me of something he'd do in that mid-early Gravity CinemaScope period. And there's some vaguely tonal, almost melodic fragments that play in the background every now and then, which are nice. Maybe not as great as the tracks that came before, but still very cool track here. The next two tracks admittedly rarely stick out to me whenever I was just putting this kind of on the background while doing other work. But that's not to say they don't also have their interesting elements as well. Really, more than anything, they just kind of blend into the vibe of the entire album. Via sub-mids with its faster-paced drum patterns and foggy clouds of moaning synth pads, and Soundboy EXT with its icy choir-like pads and old-school drum and bass breaks. They're less minimalistic, they fill more space than 50 euro to break boost, but I don't know, I guess they just happen to flow really well into each other. Even though this isn't a continuous mix, I don't think. The atmosphere is excellent as always, though. After that, we get the much more hard-hitting Dial 274, which never fails to grab my attention with his continual bass stabs and tight breakbeats. Getting maybe a little bit of a big beat vibe from those percussion sounds, even though none of the other sounds really add up to that. It's mostly just atonal glitchiness fading into the usual sea of reverb. Those bass stabs, though, boy do they kick ass. VLI, meanwhile, is attention-grabbing for the opposite reason, having almost nothing to it outside of some very low-key, repetitive melodic synth sequences, maybe kind of like a more mechanical Boards of Canada or like a more rhythmic cut from Selected Ambient Works Volume 2. It's kind of just the same chord progression the whole time and nothing really else happens. It does, as a result, kind of feels like an interlude to me. But I can't say I ever feel the urge to skip it either. But after that, I think we get probably my personal favorite track in the bunch with Flyby VFR. Filled with lots of expansive and beautiful synth pads, vaguely jazzy Metamatics-esque breakbeats, even some occasional plane sound effects. It really is the kind of track that makes you feel like you're taking off on a plane at night and getting to fly over a big city below you. And you also don't have to worry about air sickness or your seat being really stiff and all the other crap associated with air travel. Absolutely love this track. And then we have Muck FM, which kind of reads to me as like, it's kind of like Green Calcs, sort of. It's very heavy and hard-hitting beats with a lot of melodic acid synths in the melody. It's the kind of thing I've heard before plenty of times, but I really do like all these sounds anyways. And then we get another big favorite with Kozmic Flush, the most fast-paced track in the bunch. Again, a very drum and bass sort of track with a lot of acoustic cymbal textures in parts, but also more mechanical squelching noises. But again, with a progression of cloudy pads in the background at all times. I guess the somewhat more memorable and interesting counterpart to the earlier track, Soundboy EXT. This track always left a stronger impression on me than that one did. And honestly, I think this probably would have been a solid place to end the album, but instead we also finish at Calamant's Delay Mix, a subtle and even kind of jazz-tinged piece that I think makes for... It's a neat closer, but maybe not the biggest of standouts. The kind of track that's great when I'm listening to it, but kind of completely disappears from my mind after it's done. But whatever, it's still a really solid track. I mean, there's no shortage of interesting ideas on this album. As I said, every track on here has its own distinctive flavor to set itself apart from the other tracks on here, but they still all kind of fit together, create a fairly cohesive vibe that is specific to this album. Aesthetically, it is certainly very familiar. I could probably link every sound in this album to another album from the early mid-90s that I've already been listening to for years, but I will admit this particular assemblage and presentation of these sounds is quite creative and unique, and it provided more than enough substance to draw me in and keep my attention throughout its running time. The most consistently well-executed element of the album is definitely the atmosphere. Its lonely and spacious tones are always quite compelling and immersive. That said, it also kind of leads to an album that has a specific time and place where it works best. Well, more specifically time. I do tend to enjoy this album a lot more when I'm listening to it at night. A lot of my listens were in the office I work at during the day, and I probably went through like 4 entire listens of this thing front to back, where it basically all went in one ear and out the other, and just was kind of indifferent to it. Granted, I wasn't like giving it my full attention those times either, and it's also not an album that I feel like a lot of repeat listens were necessary to get the most out of it. I was already heavily impressed right on first listen, and not many of the subsequent listens really uncovered a lot of new detail that I didn't already pick up on initially. But again, the atmosphere and variety on this album made for an experience that was more than enough to just bring me in for repeat visits anyway. I never at any point got sick of this album. So yeah, overall this is a very nice underground ambient techno album with excellent production. I think it's one that people out to give a shot at some point. Very cool stuff here, might even be a year endless contender. I'm overall feeling 8.3 out of 10. But of course, it's just my opinion. You can feel free to disagree with it, but I'd like to hear your thoughts, so leave the comments in the comment thing down there. Shout out to my Patreon supporters. They're awesome people. If you want to add yourself to that list or make me review something, link to my Patreon is in the description. But yeah, that's pretty much it. That's all for today. See you next time.